Hello everyone, welcome to a new video from Chess. Welcome to episode number 2 of Secrets and Strategies, this series that you all enjoy so much and that we started the other day with the Italian opening. In this episode, I'm going to show you everything I know, and I'll even include some sneaky tricks in the Spanish opening. You already know these videos are completely free, and I explain everything I know at no cost. So if you give me a like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Let's get started with the Spanish opening. How do you play the Spanish opening? Well, after the double king's pawn, we play knight to f3, attacking the e5 pawn, and knight to c6, defending it. In the last episode, we saw bishop to c4, the Italian opening, but today we're going to look at bishop to b5, the Spanish opening. This is, you could say, the essence of the Spanish opening, or Ruy Lopez. These are the key moves to know that we're in a Spanish opening. Which variation are we going to focus on? Well, on the most popular variation right now, which is the Berlin defense. Okay. This is the most commonly played move, both in official tournaments and online games. So it's the move you'll run into the most, and we're going to dive deeper into it, alright? Here, I'm going to recommend the move castling. I'm just going to go ahead and recommend this move to you. Castling. And you might say, but wait, they're just giving us this pawn. Well, even though it's pretty common for this pawn to be taken, we really don't need to worry about it too much. Here, I'm going to show you two ideas, the one that most people use, and the one I personally recommend you try out, the one we're going to explore in depth in this video. So let's start with the most popular one, alright? The most popular move here is to play d4. As you can see, we're playing d4. Let's break it down. Like I said, this is the most popular option, but it's not the one I recommend, and now I'll explain why. When we play d4 here, let's see what happens if we take this pawn. In this case, we'd have the move rook to e1, and we'd end up with a big advantage. Why is that? Because this knight is pinned, and even though they have two extra pawns, we can take one back whenever we want. This one right here, since we have it attacked by two pieces, it's only defended by one, and it's under pressure. And most importantly, we have this knight here pinned. So this move wouldn't be good. The most common move here, when we play d4, is for them to retreat this knight here, attacking this bishop and pretty much forcing us to trade knights. And when they take, we'll capture here with this pawn, d takes e5, and after moving this knight, we trade queens. So what happens here? Let's analyze it. Alright, we've traded queens, and on top of that, we've taken away castling from the opposing king, who is now a bit exposed here in the center. In exchange, they have the bishop pair, so why don't I recommend this move? Because here, it's true that we've gained all this, but the thing is, this is an endgame that very often leads to a draw, and it's really hard to keep playing for a win. That's why I don't recommend the move d4. Now I'm going to show you the move I do recommend. Let's see, ee4, ee5, knight f3, knight c6. Thank you. Bishop to b4, Spanish opening. Knight to f6, Berlin defense. Here, as I mentioned, I recommend castling. And now, after knight takes e4, I don't recommend d4. Instead, I suggest the most logical move, which is rook to e1, attacking the knight. And indirectly, you're also attacking the e5 pawn. Here, for example, if they try to defend the knight, say like this, we simply take advantage of the tactic that this knight is pinned, and we capture the d5 pawn. Therefore, d5 is not possible now. And if they play, for example, defending the pawn with f5, then we'll play d3 and this knight will have to move. This pawn is under attack, and we've also weakened the opponent's king. So here the most typical move is not to play either of those, but instead to move the knight away while also attacking the bishop, alright? Here, what we're going to do is take advantage of this and play knight takes e5. What's going on? Now here, we're giving away the bishop. Nope, first trap. What happens if they take our bishop? Well, be careful, because if they take our bishop, we have this discovered check. Knight takes c6, check, and no matter what they do, they'd lose the queen. If they block with the queen, obviously they'd lose it that way, and if they block the check with the bishop, they'd also lose the queen. So here we've taken advantage of the first tactic. They can't take this bishop with the knight. So the most straightforward and most common move here for black is to play knight takes e5, right? Now, if I ask you all, chat, what would you do in this position? Well, I'm almost 100% sure that all of you would play rook takes e5 check. It seems like the most natural move. Plus, we're also defending the bishop. We can move it because it's in check. But here, I'm going to recommend a move that, without any risk, can help us win a lot more games. Why? Because it sets up a lot of traps, and at the same time, they're really easy for black to fall into. We're going to play knight to c3. As you can see, we've just given up a piece. Sorry, this knight here that just got taken. Now we're down a piece. And it looks like we're putting the knight here to defend the bishop, but that would still leave us down a piece, right? But that's not our plan. Be careful, because this knight is here to go to d5, not to recapture the knight. And I'm going to explain why. What happens here if they take our bishop? That's obviously the most logical move. Why? Because now black has captured two pieces and we've only taken one. Well, look, now this time we're going to play rook takes e5 check. As you can see, the only possible move to block is bishop to e7, because if they block with the queen, they'd just be giving it away. Bishop to e7. And here, like I said, instead of capturing, we're going to bring the knight to d5. Why? Let's take a close look. Now, this bishop is only defended by the king and the queen. It can't be defended by any other piece. So this bishop is going to fall no matter what. As you can see, there's no way to defend it. So here, the most common thing black does, and I checked the database and they play this about 85% of the time, is since they see we're attacking the center so strongly, they castle and at least let us recover the piece, but they put their king in safety. What happens here is that after knight takes on e7, check, and they also have to move aside. Here we have two options. One is spectacular, and the other is for if you don't remember the first one, just go with this one, okay? The easiest, for example, is knight takes bishop. And when they take back the bishop, we recapture the knight, and as you can see, we end up a piece up. Because we've taken the knight here, and the bishop here. And they've only captured two pieces. So we end up with an extra piece. But what if do you want to make it even more spectacular? Well, we would play the queen here. Amazing. And if they now try, for example, to move this knight back and keep their extra piece, then we would sacrifice the queen. An incredible queen sacrifice. The only move is to recapture with the king, and now we deliver Anastasia's mate, as you've seen many times on the channel, with the rook here on h5. All right? As you can see, this king can't go forward or backward because of the rook and this knight. It covers both escape squares for the king, so it would be a spectacular checkmate. So as you can see, knight takes bishop is a mistake. Why is that? Because after rook takes, they'd have to block, and we'd come in with a knight to e5, all right? That would be our idea. So what happens if they do not play knight takes, and instead make the right move, which is bishop to e7? Well, even though I'm telling you this is the right move, we're still giving them a chance to fall into the trap. Why? Because we can go first. Rook takes knight, and if now they fall for the trap again and decide to capture here instead of recapturing, we'd come back with the knight to e5, and we'd be in the same situation again, winning an extra piece or even finishing things off with the queen here, just the same. So we've seen what happens if they capture this bishop first. Sorry, what happens if after rook takes knight they capture this bishop, which we've already seen is a bad move. What happens if they castle instead, which is a good move, right? Castling here is a good move. So we're simply going to pull back our bishop, and where would we move it to? We'd move it back to the d3 square. And I'm going to explain why in a bit more depth. Even though it looks like we're blocking the way for our other dark squared bishop, this is actually the best spot for the light squared bishop. Why is that? As you can see, this knight started here, moved here, then here, and now it's come back here just to capture here. In other words, this knight is completely out of position. This knight on f6, as you know, is the natural defender of the kingside castle because it protects the h7 square and also defends h5 and g4, which are super important. So what happens once we have the knight on d6? Now we have a clear path to the h7 point, and it's even really easy for the queen to get in. Why is that? And for the rook, why is that? Because there isn't any defender protecting these points. Alright, let's go over everything from the beginning, because it's super important that you remember all these moves. It's important to understand why we make each move. Knight to f3 attacking the pawn, they defend, we attack this knight, which is the defender of the pawn. Berlin defense with knight to f6 attacking our pawn. Here we said that we need to castle, they capture the pawn for free, and we'll play rook to e1. Here, black has several options. We said the best is knight to d6, attacking this bishop. Let's capture here first. They recapture with the knight, and instead of capturing right away, we'll play knight to c3 first, and then they make the good move bishop to e7. What we need to do is capture first, and if instead of capturing the bishop, which we've already said is a bad move because of this move here, they castle, then what we're going to do is retreat our bishop to d3 as we mentioned before. As you can see, we've reached a position here where black hasn't made any mistakes, and they haven't fallen for any of these traps. Therefore, we have two ways to win. In this opening, one way is if they fall into one of the many traps, which, as I said, is very likely. Or two, if black plays perfectly and reaches this position, we'll still have it under control, because now I'm going to explain everything we need to do. In other words, we've got everything totally under control. So first of all, give me a like, because I'm really putting in the work and teaching you everything you need to win, totally free. So, what's going on here? What should black play here, and what's the most likely move they'll make, and why, right? Let's get to it. Bishop to f6 is the most typical move here. Why? Because they're attacking this undefended rook in the center, and they also want to take control of this file that's blocked by the bishop, a bishop that was a bit weak. Where should we move this rook back to? Well, there are several options, but the most logical one, and the one I recommend, is to retreat it to e3 for two reasons. First of all, for a pretty obvious reason, this rook wants to move over to the h file, which we said is where we're focusing all our attack, since the natural defender of the king side is out of position. Instead of being on f6, it's on d6. And second, after developing this bishop, most likely by fianchetto since it would be a bit tricky here, this rook could move over and double up on the only open square in the position. Plus, we'd gain a tempo, because this rook would already be on the file and advanced, so black would have to put their rook on the file, move it up, and then bring the other one over. They would lose two tempo. These are the two reasons. Why? Because we're going to move the piece back to e3. Here, black has two options. Actually, there are more, but if they play either of the other two, they're completely lost. Let's start. I'll tell you the three most commonly played options. One of them, as you already know, would be totally lost because we've said there are only two good ones. And let's see what we should do if they don't play the two good moves, which are 1. g6, okay, to retreat the bishop. This is the best one. Rook to e8, which isn't the best, but it's not bad either. Let's see how to play against it. And for example, c6, which would be to prevent the knight from jumping to d5, since that looks dangerous. c6 or any other move, I'm telling you right now, they lose immediately because of this bishop sacrifice on h7. Bishop takes h7 check, king takes h7, queen to h5 check, and when the bishop retreats, rook to h3 threatening two mates at once, queen to h7 mate and queen to 8 mate. Since we have a double checkmate threat, it's impossible to stop both. They could stop, for example, the mate on h8 with g6. They could stop this one, that they can't stop the mate on h7. And if they try to stop the mate on h7 by giving the king an escape route, then we deliver mate on h8. So, as we can see, this move is really bad, as is any other. Let's see what happens with the second best move, which, as I said, is still not the best. And now I'm going to explain why. Rook to 8. We've seen what happens if they play c6 or any other move. The bishop sacrifice ends up being absolutely brutal. It ends up being devastating in winning the game. For example, if they play rook to 8, which is actually a pretty good move, let's see what we need to do. First of all, since they're no longer defending this square, we can place our knight on d5. We're threatening to win a pair of bishops, and as you can see, in a completely open opening like this, having the pair of bishops is practically essential. So what happens if they play the logical move against us? As you can see here, all the squares in a row are lined up. I just noticed that. Let's take a look. Sorry, I meant in a column. What happens if they play the most logical move here? So first, we're going to exchange the rooks. They can't capture with the queen, as you can see, because the misfork would come. So no matter what, they have to take with the knight. And now here, we're going to play the brutal move, queen to g4, taking advantage of the fact that this knight isn't here and isn't covering these two squares. What are we threatening with this queen? Well, the main thing we're threatening is it's the bishop. All right, what's going on? For example, if they move the bishop back here, then queen to e4 comes, threatening the bishop and threatening checkmate. basically winning the game, since they can't defend against both threats at the same time. What happens if they bring the bishop to f6, which seems like a much safer move? Well, now we would bring the queen back to e4, a super strong square, because we're threatening checkmate, and as you all can see, the only way to stop it is by playing g6. This is the only way to stop the checkmate. What happens here is that if they play g6, the good move, we win a piece. How? I'll give you 3 seconds to think. Spectacular. Queen sacrifice, queen takes knight, check. If they move the king, we pull back the queen and we've already won a piece. If they take the queen and accept the sacrifice, knight takes on f6, double attack, check, and when they move, we take the queen. As you can see here, we end up a piece up. We have 2 bishops and they only have 1, and the same number of pawns, so we're cleanly up a piece. We've seen what happens when we place the queen here attacking this bishop. What if the bishop retreats on the king side, either here, which would be met by this move threatening mate, or here, which would also be met by this move threatening mate and threatening the queen sacrifice? So moving the bishop over here is not a good idea. Let's see what happens when they move it to the other side. For example, when they move it to c5. When they move it to c5, what they're really giving us is a free tempo by letting us play our pawn to b4, and on top of that, they're giving us this great square for our bishop, which was previously trapped. For example, what happens if they put the bishop on f8, trying to defend against this checkmate? Well, be careful, because here they've fallen into another trap. As you can see, it's full of traps, and if we know them, it's practically impossible for them to avoid all of them. We'll set our trap again. Queen here, threatening checkmate, and when they play g6, as always the only move to stop the checkmate, we once again make the brutal queen sacrifice. After queen takes, we'll bring this knight over here, check. The king can't come here to defend the queen, so when it moves, we'll end up with an extra piece again. If we count, we have 3 pieces compared to the opponent, and we also have this check ready to deliver checkmate in just a few moves. So after the move e4, we've seen that they can't go here anymore, so they have to come here. And what we'll do is, first, take advantage of the same thing as before, force them to play g6. And here, we're going to see the importance of the bishop pair. Why is the bishop pair so important? Because while one weakens and has to make the position solid, for example on the white squares, the other takes advantage of it on the black squares. When one bishop weakens some pawns and forces them onto its own color, the other bishop can take advantage on the opposite color. On its own color, it weakens the squares of the other color so that the other bishop can take advantage. For example, here, once we've played this, they might play d6 because we're threatening to bring the queen here and deliver a checkmate on h8 that's completely unstoppable. For instance, they could play d6, to which we would simply play rook to e1, meaning we're bringing all our pieces into the attack so they can coordinate. For instance, if they play a defensive move like bishop to e6, which I think is the most common move in this position, what we're going to do is exchange this knight for this bishop that was blocking this square, place the queen, again threatening mate. Now, they can't block with g6 because the bishop would be hanging. For instance, you might say, well, you've set this up really well for yourself, but let's see what happens if, instead of placing, let's put it back the way it was. Instead of placing the bishop here, they put it here. Let's set it back to how it was. There is. So if instead of playing the bishop here, they play it to d7, I'll tell you, for example, you can play knight to d7 check. When they come over here, as you can see, there are multiple ways to win. I'll show you, for example, the moves I would make. I would place the queen over here. Over here, as you can see, the engine says the only way to save it is to play this move, because if not, the queen comes in here and it's checkmate on the next move. When they play here, we can sacrifice this knight, check, open up the position, come in with a check from the queen. When they move over here, we have a lot of ways to finish, like for example bishop takes, or we could also exchange some pieces, bring the queen even closer, maybe here, threatening mates in this area. After the knight exchange, we'd have multiple ways to finish it off from here. I'm not going to go through it move by move because that would mean looking at it little by little, but anyone would be able to finish it off. So now let's look at the last option, and the best one for black. Like I said, let's review from the beginning so we really get the whole opening and all the moves down. Knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b4, knight to f6, setting up the Berlin defense. Castling, giving up the pawn, we'll play rook to e1. When they retreat, we'll play knight takes on e5, and here, instead of playing rook takes, we'll play knight to c3, setting up those multiple traps. Here, the best move black has, as you can see, is bishop to e7. Rook takes knight, castle, we pull the bishop back because we don't want it to be taken, bishop to f6, we move the rook back to e3. We've already seen rook to e8, that's the one we've just looked at. Now, what happens if they play g6, which is the best move at this point? Well, here we're going to play queen to f3. I'm going to recommend this move, queen to f3, because it's targeting this square. This square is very important, and I'm going to explain why. Right now, they can't develop this bishop because if they try to develop it, we would take the rook. Therefore, they're forced to move this pawn if they want to get this bishop out. For example, here, first of all, this bishop has to be played to g7, since that's the most logical move here, and we're going to take advantage of it by playing g3, alright? And here, when they move the knight back to play this pawn here and develop their bishop, what we're going to do is gain this really important tempo by attacking this rook. They have to play d6, which they were going to play anyway. And here, what we're going to do is double our rooks. Now, sure, black can bring out their bishop, but here, look at the position where we have all our pieces coordinated. This bishop is attacking over here, both rooks are doubled on the open file, while black doesn't have any. All our pieces are developed, even the queen is in play. Meanwhile, black is in a much worse position. This is what would happen if black played perfectly. Even if they play perfectly, we would still have the advantage. Even so, along the way, we've seen plenty of tricks to win much earlier than reaching this position. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a like. I'd really appreciate it. Leave me a comment to let me know what videos or tips you recommend I make in the future, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!